Welcome to our section on JavaScript loops. Are you tired of writing the same code over and over and over and over again? Well, this is your opportunity to get familiar with loops because the loops will save you time. They allow you to loop through, iterate through code multiple times, and you can specify how many times you can loop through that code, setting up a condition, and you get full control over the output. So it allows you to loop through the number of times that block of code is going to get executed. So loops really do save you time because they allow you to execute content as many times as you need within your code. We're going to look at the do loop and as well as the do while loop, the while loop, and the for loop. So all of the different types of loops that are available within JavaScript. The do while loop is a statement that gets executed at least once, and it's re-executed every time that condition evaluates to true. And there's different cases that you might use one loop over another, and this is up to you to decide. Depending on what is best for your application, you can utilize the tool, the different loop that you need in order to accomplish what you're setting out to do within your code. For loops are definitely the most popular type of loop, so you're going to see those most often used within code, but sometimes they're not the best case to use within code. And there's also while loops. So while loops continue to execute while a condition is true. So for loops, as we mentioned, are the most popular format for looping and most used within JavaScript code. We're going to introduce you to some more exercises so that you can see this code in action and see how useful it can be when you're writing out applications. We're going to be building out a calorie counter. It's going to ask how many of these items that you want to eat, and it's going to tell you how many calories you're burning using a loop. There's also nested loops. So it allows you to build more and do even more with looping. A loop within a loop, looping the child, and then also looping out the parents. So you can have full control and loop out, build out tables, and a whole lot more using this type of format and loops. There's also stop, which allows you to stop the loop, and also continue, which allows you to continue looping depending on a condition. So I'm going to show you these and a whole lot more within this section. Also, adding conditions to loops really allows you to customize that output. Because remember, you can set in different pieces of code and you can apply different conditions as we saw in the last lesson. And we're building upon what we've learned in the previous sections. So we're coming together and we're putting everything together using loops. There's also different types of loops where we're pairing loops with arrays. So this is a natural way of getting information as we iterate through all of the different information that's contained within the array. And this really shows the usefulness and the value of loops because we can pull out a lot of information quickly without having to be very specific, because we know with an array it contains information and it's generally ordered information. So if we go through the index, we can pull out that information using a loop. Also objects. Objects, we saw that they can hold a lot of information and data, and we can utilize them with loops to pull some of that information out and utilize it within our code. We're also going to be building out a shopping list. So this is going to be a great exercise to get familiar with what can be done with loops and arrays and how we can really utilize this type of code and the code we've learned in the previous sections in a more real-life example. And I do encourage you to work alongside and take advantage of all the different challenges that we're offering within this section to really get familiar with what's possible with loops and what loops can do in JavaScript. Welcome back, and in this lesson we're going to be looking at the do while loop. So basically a loop allows you to execute a block of code a number of times, and you can set the parameters for that. So let's set up our first loop, and loops save us time. So this one is called a do loop, and there are a number of different ways to do the loops. So I'm going to show you the different ways to get and execute the loops. And there's also different rationale for doing them in all of these ways, but they all do need three different expressions and I'm going to show you those as well. So the first one that we need to set is we need to set a variable. So I'm going to set a variable of x, and I'm going to set it to be 0. And then, so this is the do loop, and what I need to do within the do loop is I need to increment x. So lastly, and the most important one, so we've set a starting value for x. We're doing something with x so that we can eventually break out of the loop. And lastly, the most important part, most important expression that we need to add in a loop is we need to set a breaking point. And this is where we can use while. So what we want to do is we want to continue to loop while x is less than 10. And then once x is less than 10, then we're actually going to break out of the loop. So let's create our variable output. And this one, we're going to grab that element in the DOM. So it's document get element by ID. And then we need to identify the element that we want to grab. So we want to set up that inner HTML. So as we're looping through, we're going to output inner HTML, and what we're going to do is we're going to keep concatenating to it. So we're going to add to the existing content, and we want to output a value of x. So let's do value x equals, so we can see the value of x as we're looping through. And then also I'm going to add a line break, so just some HTML, so we can differentiate between the different iterations of the loop. So we're all ready to go. So let's try this out. So we see that what gets output here is starting at the value of 0, we continuously loop through the value of x. So it outputs it and it increments x. And then it hits this statement here where we've got while. So this is our condition. So just like the conditions that we saw earlier, that while this condition is not true, and that's the point where it will break the loop. So this condition always has to be true or it's going to break out of the loop. So we know at this point that it's gone through its output x, and let's do one more, and we're going to say final value of x. So the final value of x, so what do you think the final value of x is? And we can quickly run through the code here. So starting at a value of 0, we're looping it through, we're incrementing x here, and then we have the condition while it's less than 10. It's not less than and equal to 10 while it's less than 10. And that's where we break out of the loop. So do you think that it actually runs one more time, increments x? So do you think x will be 10, or do you think x will be 9? So let's refresh the page. And if you said x is 10, you're actually correct. So what's happened here is because we've done the increment afterwards, after the output here, so this is why the value of x is 10. So order is really important especially when you're incrementing a value and then you're using that value in the output. So what if I put it before that output statement? What do you think the value of x is going to be? Do you think that the final value of x is going to be equal to the last one that we're outputting within the loop iteration? So let's refresh that and see what the answer is. So it is 10, and going through the code, so you can see that we're starting at 0, we enter in within the loop, we immediately increment x by 1. So at this point, x is already 1. When we're doing the output, we see the value of x gets output to 1, and then we continue to loop through and we check to see if the condition is true, and then we continue to go back there. So we're not going to actually do one more trip and increment x. So the last time we incremented at x, we're outputting it as 10, and we break the loop at this point because the condition now is no longer true. It's no longer less than 10. So the condition is false, and then we output the value. So let's do an exercise now, and what I want you to do for this exercise is to ask the user coming in, so using a prompt, ask them for a value and ask them how many times you want them or they want you to loop through the code and output the value. So let's give it a go and add in the prompt, and then using the return value of the prompt, that's where you set the condition for the loop and limit the number of times that we iterate through the loop. And you can keep the output the same, where we're outputting the value of X as we're doing our count and we're looping through. So go ahead, open up your editor, pause the video, and create that prompt, and then letting the user set the breaking point for the loop. So I hope you had an opportunity to try that out, and let's just do one here called answer and prompt, and we'll ask how many times do you want me to loop, with a question mark at the end. So now whenever the user is going to get prompted, whenever they refresh the page, they're going to get prompted and they're going to get asked how many times they want to see this loop. So all we have to do is take the value of answer and use that as our breaking point for the loop. So enter in answer, we can go out and refresh, and now we're asked how many times do we want to loop. So now we can enter in whatever number we want, and we'll see that the actual loop loops as many times as we entered in there. So we could enter in a really large number, and probably not a great idea, but it does work. So you should have some type of limits. Another thing too as well, we should also add in something where maybe we do a check to see if the value is actually numeric. So you can see here that even if I enter in something, we actually still do that one loop through, because what's happening now is that we're still going into the code, we're reading through it, and the condition actually isn't, so we do the do, which basically means, and this is really important to note as well, so even though we didn't actually have a numeric value, we rendered out, we went through do, we incremented X, we output the value of X, and then we hit the condition, and within this condition, we know that answer actually wasn't holding a numeric value, so basically the loop broke and we output the value there. So it's important to note this, that we did pick up a value within answer, but it wasn't numeric, so the loop still ran and the condition broke us out of the loop before it could run that second round. So one thing I did want to note, that we know that with prompts, the actual value is going to be a string value, but JavaScript's flexible enough to work with it, but realistically this should actually be updated to number, just to make sure that we are actually using a number value. And we can also add in a condition that checks to see if the type of value, so if we take number answer, and let's use type of, so that's the one that we used before. So we're converting number answer into a number value. So let's go ahead and convert answer into a number value. So do number answer. So this will actually convert our string value into a number or numeric value in order to be able to loop through there. And then all we need to do is just make sure that this one is answer as well. So this is going to be using that value of answer. Let me refresh it. And now it's going to ask me how many times we want to loop through there. So everything is working as before. And I can open up the console and I can do type of answer. And we can see that now it's a number. So that's the answer that we had given. And we see that's taken in numeric format. So what I want you to do now for the challenge is to open up your editor and loop through numbers 0 to 30 and only output the even numbers. So looping through all of those numbers, and I only want you to output within that inner HTML, only output those even numbers. So I'll just give it a second and pause the video and try it out for yourself, and I'll show you the answer coming up. So I hope you had the opportunity to try this out yourself. So let's clean up some of this code. We don't need answer anymore, so I can get rid of those ones. And what we need to do is, so we can set it starting at 0. We want to loop through while x is less than 31. Or we could say 30. It actually doesn't matter because we only want to hit the even numbers. So while we're looping through the value of x, and it's also important to note where we're placing the x increment here. So I'm going to leave it where it is, and of course if I put that above and I did the conditional statement, then we would have a different value for x. So coming in, x starts out at 0, but then we already add 1, so it's already up to 1. So we can actually, it might actually be better that if we add it down here so we can start at 0. So 0 would be our first even number. So now we need to add in the condition. So let's take a look at the value of x, and we'll look at x and we'll see if x, and remember modulus. So modulus gives us the ability to check if there's a remainder to a number. So if we divide it by 2, we know that the number, if we divide it by 2 and the remainder is 0, we know that that number is even. So we can output the value of x. So we can just simply keep that statement that we have there, and we're going to output the value of x. And then we're going to continuously loop through, and we can leave this one in as well. So let's open up the browser. Let's refresh the page. And now we see that we're starting at 0. We've got 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, all of the even numbers all the way up to 30. So that's the solution. And in the next lesson, we're going to look at while loops. So we've already looked at the do while loop, and the while loops are going to be slightly different. So that's coming up in the next lesson. Welcome back, and in this lesson, we're going to look at while loops. So we saw earlier that the do while loop, and what happens with the do while loop is that the statement is done before the expression. So we've got the statement over here, and we always run through this statement at least one time. So there was no escape for it, and even when the value of the answer that we had, the prompt was not a number, it would still always run through once, and then it would realize the condition is not met. So the while loop is going to be slightly different. So we need to include, for all of the loops, we always need to have those same 3 parts to it. So we need to have an increment, so that a way that it's actually changing. We also need to have an initial value, so a starting point for the loop. And then over here, we also need to have a condition that's met to give the ability to actually break out of the loop. So let's set that up again, and this time we're just going to use the while loop. So we can get rid of some of this information here. And if we're using a number, so this is where we enter in the code that's going to run through here. And there is going to be a difference to the way that the code is being output. So we see that the condition is over here. Our starting point of x is 0, and we need to increment x by 1. So this gives us our way out of our loop, and eventually this condition will no longer be true, and that's when the loop is going to break. So let's output some content. So we'll output inner HTML, and we'll add to the existing inner HTML. This is going to look a lot like what we had before. Value of x is equal to, and then let's put the value of x, and then we'll add in a line break. So let's see what happens. So going over here, remember again that we're starting with x and we're incrementing it. So if we place this increment after this, which would typically make more sense, so let's do it that way. So this time, let's increment x after we've actually run through it, and then let's also do that final output of x. So final value of x is going to be equal to whatever the value of x is leaving the loop. So let's see what happens. We refresh it, and we're starting at 0, we're looping through, and we see that we do still do that increment, and then we break out of the loop. So this is slightly different because previously when we were doing the do while loop, we saw that even when we had the prompt, then we still ended up looping through all of the values. So let's recreate that, but this time within the while loop. So remember, we had a prompt, we were asking how many times that we want to loop through, and then we were looping through the number, whatever was being returned in the answer. So let's pause the video, open up your editor, and add in that prompt asking for how many times we want to loop through here. And then we're going to do relatively the same thing we did for the do while loop. So now let me show you the answer here. So we're going to do the same thing that we did before. We're doing prompt. We're going to ask how many times should I loop? So that's the question, asking how many times that we need to loop. And we saw earlier that we can just put the answer in there. So that will give us a breaking point to get out of the loop. And also maybe we can start at 1. So we know that the first time going through there, it's going to hit 1. And then we'll leave that x final value of x. So let's see what happens. So we're going to ask the question, how many times should we loop? So let's say 7. And so we see what's happened here is that we're starting at 1. So we go through and we see that x is less than 1. So that condition is true. So it outputs 1. Then x is less than, or I should say x is less than 7. So it outputs it. X is less than 7 again. And it continues to output it. And at this point, it's already gone through there. It's output it. So it's output the 6. And now x is 7. So then it's going to stop executing the code. So let's go through here again. And let's put in something that's not a number. And basically, it doesn't actually loop through x. So x did not change. So this is the big difference between the while loop and the do while loop. So if you want an opportunity to run through the code that's sitting in here, then you can go ahead and use the do while loop. Otherwise, use the while loop because this code won't get executed if this condition is not met. So now it's time for a challenge. So we saw that both of these loops work slightly differently. So let's have a more interesting challenge. So let's say that we're going to create a secret password. And what I want to happen is I want this loop to continuously prompt the user until they actually guess the password. And that's where the loop is going to break. So this is going to be slightly different. We're not actually going to have to set a number because the way out of the loop is the condition for the loop that it's actually going to break out of it is going to be once we get the correct answer. So go ahead, open up your editor and try that out. So you know that we do need to set a secret password, so you can make that anything that you want. And I'm actually going to make mine JavaScript, so you can do the same if you want. So set up a variable, create that secret password, and then put the prompt inside of the while loop, and then do a condition to check to see if the user guessed correctly. So open up your editor, try that out, and I'll show you the solution coming up. Okay, so I hope you had an opportunity to try this out. And so let's update the code for an answer to this, for an answer to our challenge. So we'll call it secret, and let's do a word. So I'm going to just do JavaScript. I'm going to do all lowercase. So we're not going to make it that difficult that the user actually has to guess the case as well. So earlier we saw that we were using variable, we're setting a numeric number, and we're looping through till we broke out of the loop. So if we're actually using a condition that is not numeric, then we don't actually need to increment the values. So we can get rid of that stuff there. So next, let's initiate this. So we need a way to actually initiate and ask the user if they've what the secret word is. And the way that we're going to do this, we're actually going to do this first outside of the loop, and then we're going to do one inside of the loop. Because if I do something inside of the loop, so let's say crack code, and we do something in here where we do a prompt. The problem is that if we're looking to see if the crack code is equal to the secret, then we're never going to get to the point where we're doing the prompt unless the prompt is actually sitting outside of the while, and we can also have another one inside. So let's set one up. So we're going to set a variable up, and this variable is going to be called crack code, and this is going to be prompt. So basically, this is where we're going to set up that condition that we're going to loop through. So prompt is going to say, what is the secret word? And the user comes in, sees this prompt, they enter something in for the crack code, and we're going to check to see if it's equal to secret. But if it is equal to secret, then it's true, and then we're going to run through the code. So that doesn't make sense. So let's set it to not be equal to secret. And next, we can say guess again. So basically, what's going to happen here is once the user is presented first with a prompt asking for the secret word. If it's not equal to the secret word, we're going to just ask them to guess again. So let's see how this works. And we're going to be doing it within order. So we know that lastly, we can say something like you guessed correct, or we can simply have another condition over here. So let's see how this works before we add the final output. And we'll just do something like that as a placeholder. So let's try it out. So what is the secret word? I'm going to put in test, and it's going to say guess again, and guess again, and guess again. And I'm going to continuously have to guess, and it'll never get to the output because it's going to continue within this loop. So loops could go on and on and on until you actually get a way to break out of them. So now, when I enter in this word, this condition is no longer going to be true, and we're going to be able to continue with our script. So let's see how that works. So we hit OK, and we get the final output. So the only way to continue is to actually guess the word properly, and then if you do, then you actually get to continue out, and you get that final output. So let's try something else. So what if we start out here, and the user already enters in the right word? It still works because of the fact that this statement is not true. So it just ignores what's happening in here. And if we did this in a do while loop, then it wouldn't ignore that prompt and it would mess things up. So in this case, if you're doing something like this, where you're doing a guess of a word, then we know that in this scenario, this works out perfectly because we can't continue, we can't get to this line of code unless we break out of the loop. And the loop will continue until we guess the word that we had provided, so until we guess that secret word. So the next lesson, we're going to look at the most popular way to do loops, and that's the for loop. So that's coming up in the next lesson. Welcome back. In this lesson, we're looking at for loops. So for loops are probably by far the most popular loop. And for loops basically are used to loop through a predetermined number of times. So they still share those same initialization, condition, and then the final expression. So let's take a look at the for loop, and we're going to create a very basic for loop. So we'll do a for. So we're going to start with for. And then as mentioned, we do need that initialization. So we're going to use x again. We need to set up a variable. So I'm declaring x and I'm giving x a starting value. So we're going to start it as at 0. Next, we need to have our condition in order to break out of the loop. Otherwise, the loop will just go on and on and on and on. So, and it also crash your browser, so that's not good. And we do need a way out of the loop. So let's start it out and let's break out of the loop. So previously we're breaking out, so let's break out at 10. And then lastly, so what is the final thing that we need in this loop? So we know that we started at 0. We know that we're looping through while x is less than 10, but we need a way to get to 10 or above 10. We need basically a way, an expression in order to be able to break out of our condition. So that's where we increment x. And notice that it's all done nice and neatly between the rounded brackets within the for loop. So we don't have any values of x or any of these floating outside. It's all nice and neatly packaged. And this is probably why the for loops are the most popular, because it's just this one statement and then you know everything that's in here is basically being output. So speaking of output, let's set up our output. So again, document and get element by ID, and let's grab output. So place that value in there. So this will give us something that we can actually output. So let's do output and set the inner HTML, and we're going to equal that. So we're going to concatenate it together to the existing inner HTML that's there. So we're going to add to it, and let's just say value of x is, so we'll do relatively what we did earlier. So we're going to list the value of x and then concatenate together a line break so that's more readable. So let's try this out. And we see that starting at 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So lists everything out. Once it hits the condition, then it breaks out of the condition. So it's as easy as that. And we can see that this is also one of the cleanest ways to write loops. So we have everything right there in front of us. We have all of our settings here, our expressions that allow us to initiate and set up that loop. So this time I want to do the same challenge as we did earlier, where we only output values that are, so previously we did even, so let's do values that are odd. We only want to output the values that are odd, and change this to loop through to 30 or 31, and try it out. Open up your editor, try it out, and I'll show you the solution. So I hope you had the opportunity to try that out, and I do believe we did say 31. So let's loop it, starting at 0, looping it to 31, and we're only going to output the odd value. So this is where we do our conditional statement here, where we're going to check to see if x modulus 2 is, so we know that if it's even, then it's going to be 0. So we can also check to see if it's not 0. So if it's not 0, then we know that it's not even. So therefore it must be odd. So let's try this out now. So refresh it, and we see that we get all of the odd numbers all the way up. And we notice that it's not including 31. So the second part of this challenge is, this is a surprise second part. What I want you to do is include 31 in this list. So go ahead, open up your editor and try that out. Okay, so the solution for this was really easy. So going back to where we were looking at conditions, we know that we can do less than or equal to. So let's try that out now, refresh it, and there's 31 within our list. So let's finish off this lesson with another challenge. So what I want to do is I want to ask the user how many bananas they want to eat, and I want to loop through it, and I want to write down how many calories each banana that the person is consuming is adding, and then after the loop is finished, I want to write out the total calories that the user had consumed. So this is going to be at the top here. You're going to have to set up a prompt, and then depending on what the value of the prompt is, then we're going to do our loop. We've got our condition there for the loop, and we need to add and multiply a running calorie count of how many calories the user is consuming. And also I'll add in that calories are within every banana, there's approximately 89 calories. So that's the number that you can go by in order to create this challenge. And open up your editor, try it out, and I'll show you the solution coming up. So I hope you had an opportunity to try this out for yourself. So what I first want to do, I'm just going to establish a variable for the banana calories. So usually I like to create variables for these so that the script is more dynamic. And if, for instance, all of a sudden I find out that the bananas, maybe they were really large bananas and the calories were more than 89, then I can really easily go back and adjust my script. So let's set one up, calories, banana. And actually I did look this up, so it does say that bananas are 89 calories. So that's where I use that number from. So next we need to have how many. So just set up a variable. We'll call it banana count, bananas. How about we just call it bananas? So let's set up that prompt and ask the user how many bananas do you want to eat? And finish that off with a question mark. So we're going to ask the user how many bananas they want to eat. So this should be a number, numeric value, and we're going to loop through the number of bananas that the user wants to eat. So there's no use doing the loop unless we have at least 1. So let's set the value of x at 1, and we're going to continue to loop it through while x is less than 1. So if they enter in 0, then we already know that we need to break out of this loop. So next, we need to calculate how many calories this is going to be. So let me get rid of this part here, and let's update this so we know that we're outputting. And then lastly, we also need to have an output of the total calories. Let's do another one here. So let's set up another variable. So this will be our placeholder. We'll just call it total for now. And right now we'll just start it out at 0. And now let's add in our total here, so we know that every time we're looping through, we're going to do total, and we're going to add to total whatever the value of calories banana is going to be. So that's 89. So again, this is dynamic, so if we change the number of calories per banana, our totals will change as well. So let's do some type of message. So you ate 1 banana. Another, and let's also add this in dynamically. So this message to the user could be anything that you want, really. You ate 1 banana, another calories. Your total is now, and this is where we can just add in whatever the value of total is. So there we go. So we've got that output, and your total calorie count is, and then this, we just need to enter in the total there. So we don't actually have to have the line break either, because this is our last part of whatever we're outputting into our HTML. So let's give it a try. So let's refresh the page. How many bananas do you want to eat? So I'm going to eat 10 bananas. So you ate 1 banana, another 89 calories. So let's, we see that we do get the 10. So we got a total calorie of 890. So that worked. So this is kind of ugly. So what we also need to do is we need to change the value of X there. So let's update this now. So let's add in X. So that's a dynamic value. So this is going to be changing. And also, we also want a different message for the first one, because when we see that our first one, you ate 1 banana, another 89 calories, your total is now 89. Well, they didn't really eat another one. And so the 89 is right, but we need to have something different within that message. So now what I want you to do as well is to add a condition in there, and let's change some of this wording. So we know that the first time through, if X is equal to 1, then they've only ate 1 banana. If X is equal to anything larger than 1, then it should be bananas and another 89 calories added to your total or something like that. So try that out, open that up in your editor, and try making these adjustments, and I'll show you the solution coming up. So the solution really is that we can use an if statement to check to see what the value of X is, and we can also go back to our default, which was the ternary statement, which we were looking at before. So let's use that one, and I'm going to set a variable, and I'm going to give it, I'm just going to give a name holder. So this was just a variable that we've created over there, and now I can reset the value of holder. So let's take holder, and this is actually going to be what I'm using for the output. So if X is equal to 1, so if X is equal to 1, then this is the ternary operator. So we're going to set the value of bananas, and so it'll say you ate, actually this should be greater than 1. So let's update this. So anything greater than 1, so if this is true, then it's going to say bananas, another whatever calories added to your total, now at, and then that's the value. So let's also do something for if it is equal to 1. So the first time through it's going to be 1. So we'll say you ate 1 banana, and we can just leave it at that. So now let's take holder, and we're going to drop them in. Instead of having this, we're going to add it in there. So now, and we should also add in some spacing. So let's see how this works, or if the wording is a little bit better. So let's do 8. And we can see you ate 1 banana, 89 calories added to your total, now at 89. You ate 2 bananas, so notice the S there, another 89 calories added to your total. So I know that's kind of long, but so we'll just leave it at that, and we see that everything is working, and we've got better grammar within our output. So in the next lesson, we're going to look at nested loops and what we can do with nested loops. So it's coming up. Welcome back, and in this lesson, we're going to look at nested loops. So basically a nested loop is a loop inside of a loop. And there's a number of reasons why you might want to create one of these, and one of them might be that you might want to build out a table. So let's start by setting up our variable, doing our document, and get element by ID. So we'll grab that output, and this is where we're actually going to place our table. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to create a holder. So we'll just call it HTML, and this is going to be our starting point for our table. So we're just going to create a table. So the next thing that we need to do is loop through building out the rows, and then within the rows, then we build out the columns within those rows. So let's build that out, and we're going to start with a for loop. So it's going to start out, and we can start creating a variable called row, and we're going to start out at row 0, and we're going to loop it while row is, maybe let's just do 10 rows. So we can have as much flexibility as we want when we're building out our table, especially when we're doing it dynamically like this. So now we've got the row value, and we know with HTML, so we need to increment it and concatenate it with tr. So that's going to open up our row. And the next thing that we need within our HTML is we need to have some cells, some table cells. So this one, let's start out and we'll do COL, and we'll start at 0, and COL while it's less than 2, and we'll increment it by 1. And this is also very important when you're nesting these loops to make sure that you declare the values, because otherwise, once we finish the first iteration and we try to use this one again, the value of COL will be different. So keep that in mind when you are setting up the loops, that you want to make sure that you're not starting out with a value of COL, because otherwise that will just mess things up. So next, let's add in the column. And so this is just our HTML. So let's do TD, and we'll put in some value in there, cell equals, and put in the value of COL. And we're going to adjust that afterwards. So close off that cell, and that's all we need for that part. And then next, we're going to add to that HTML, and let's add our closing of the row. And then finally and lastly, let's add to the HTML, and let's close off the table. And we need to output inner HTML. So make sure it's inner HTML, and we're just going to have that HTML variable. So let's see what happens. So we built it out, and of course we should have some type of borders for our cells. So let's add in some styling here. So just do a quick border for TDs, and we'll do border 1 pick solid black. So let's refresh that. So there we go. So we built out our table, and we can see that within our HTML. So we've got a nicely built 2-column table all ready to go within our HTML. So now what I want you to do, so this challenge is going to involve some math. So what I want to do is I want to have the cell 1, 2, and actually let's update this to have 5 columns. So we're going to make a really big table here. So I'll have 5 columns starting out at 1 and then finishing off at, I believe, probably 50. So starting out at 1, 2, so going across this way, the next row will increment it by 5 or whatever number of columns we're using, and increment, increment, increment again. So pause the video, open up your editor, build out this table, and then update the contents of the cells. And I'll show you the solution coming up. So I hope you had the opportunity to try that out. Did you open it up and create 5 columns? And you can see that now how easy it is when you're looping through these nested rows. If all of a sudden I want 5 columns, it's as easy as that. So the value that we're putting in within the cell, we've got to do some math here. So if we want to increment it by 1 because we're starting at 0 and we're looping till we get to 5. So there's a number of options here. We could update this and update this one as well. So for myself, I generally like to start at 0 and loop till it's under 5 so that I can really easily see that number 5 there if I want to make an adjustment to it. And it's a lot easier if I want to do something dynamic where I ask number of rows, number of columns, and I could just use variables in there. So it makes it more dynamic, and that's usually why I want to keep it within this type of format. And I would rather add the 1 to the value of COL over here just in that output part. So let's try that out. So now we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but this one's not right. So we need to do something else here. So we need to actually do some multiplication. So if we multiply this by the value of row, let's see what happens. So we refresh it and we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then we've got 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. So that's not really great, although this is incrementing this way, it's not actually working the way that we need it to. So to work this out, another trick that I usually like to do is I'll just like to output the value of row so that I can get a clear sense of what we're looking at here. So we're multiplying by 0, and we know when we multiply by 0, we end up with 0. So we don't want to do that. So we want to add 1 to the row as well. So the same thing we did with the column, we should add it to the row. So let's see what happens now. So now we've got row 1 all the way to 10, and we see that we've got all of those cells there. So that looks pretty good, and we know that we should multiply. So to get a value of 6 here, if we multiply the row by the number of columns that we have, then we should start out at 6. But the other thing to keep in mind, if we do 2 times 5, then we're going to be at 10, which will be at 11, and that's the next one over here. So we don't actually need that plus 1, and all we do need to do is multiply it by 5. So let's try that out now. So now we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then we've got 1, and if we do 1 plus 5, then we've got the right number. So let's remove out this concatenation here and try this again. And we see what's happening now is it looks like it's working right, but these aren't actually numbers because these values are being treated as separate values, so we're not actually adding them together. And in order to add them together, all we're doing, originally we're concatenating them, so to add them together, add that second rounded bracket, and there we go. So that's the solution to the challenge. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, all the way to 50. So other reasons to use nested loops, you could also use them when you're building out multi-dimensional arrays, and the idea is the same thing as we've just done with the table, but this is more conceptual, where we've got multiple items here within the array, and that way we can build those out as well. So take a look at building out tables, make some adjustments, play around with it, try to make these as dynamic variables, and in the next lesson, we're going to look at break and continue within loops. So that's coming up.